Saraya Mia. MACC Chief to appear before PSC next week. And athletes' development requires better planning. That's coming up. The government has set a ceiling price for the sale of Sinovac and Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccines in the private market. The wholesale ceiling price of the vaccine from Sinovac is 62 ringgit and 77 ringgit for customers. Meanwhile, the wholesale ceiling price for Sinopharm is 48 ringgit and 61 ringgit for customers. The ceiling price would come into effect on January 15. Health Minister Khairi Jamaluddin and Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs Minister Datuk Sri Alexander Nantalinggi said the ceiling price was implemented based on the price of importing the vaccines along with current market values. Tan Sri Azam Baki has been summoned to give an explanation on the controversy surrounding his shares ownership. He was ordered to appear before the Parliamentary Select Committee, PSC, on the agencies under the Prime Minister's department for a meeting next Wednesday. An official letter has been issued by Dewan Rakyat Secretary Nizamaidin Bacha to Azam, asking him to present himself before the PSC in Parliament on January 19, a day before the Dewan Rakyat sits for a special meet to discuss the recent flooding across the country. Azam has previously said that he will not resign as the chief of the MACC, nor will he heed demands to quit, adding that the Yang di-Pertuan Agong is the only one who can decide to terminate him. Founder of the anti-graft movement, Rasuah Busters, Dato' Husamuddin Yaakob, called for urgent reforms to the MACC. Speaking at a forum on solutions to reform the MACC, he urged Malaysians to not be too focused on one case.
Kalaulah kita berjaya gantung Tan Sri Azam Baki, 10 Azam Baki lagi boleh, masalah yang sama boleh timbul kalau dia tidak bersihkan sistem. Jadi maknanya perlu kepada pembersihan ataupun satu reformasi atau transformasi institusi SPRM itu sendiri. Jadi kita nak supaya satu SPRM yang betul-betul utuh, yang betul-betul kredibel, yang betul-betul boleh menyelesaikan masalah kita untuk membersihkan Malaysia daripada rasuah ini.
Meanwhile, at the same forum, the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs Ideas and the Centre to Combat Corruption and Cronyism C4 suggested the setting up of an independent anti-corruption commission, IACC, to oversee MACC as well as appoint its head. The commission, they said, would be a free and independent institution uninfluenced by political and executive power. The National Sports Council's decision to drop more than 100 athletes from the national program does not paint a good picture for Malaysian sports. One of the dropped athletes, squash player Loh Wee Wen, said there should be better planning in such an impactful decision if it were to be made again in the future.
A lot of people don't realize how massive this impact will be, not just for this year, but for many years to come. I think in that sense, it's not a good picture for sports in general, because I think a lot of parents would be a lot more skeptical wanting to have their kid going to do sports full time if they are seeing this happen at this point in time, So I don't think it's a great example. But I mean, like I said, at the end of the day, we understand budget cuts and the country is facing obviously the pandemic with the COVID-19 and also now with the recent floods and everything. So we do understand budget cuts. However, I do feel that the procedure of how things has been done should have been better. And also, I think the decision was made, to me, could be a bit hastily and a bit last minute.
Aside from that, the NSC also announced cutting allowances of athletes from 2,000 ringgit to as low as 800 ringgit. Wee Wen stressed that this would deeply impact individual athletes' performances.
We are full-time athletes, so if we have to go and look for a different job just to supplement our income, then our training will no longer be 100%, because in training as well, an important part is recovery. So having that downtime to actually sit down and recover rather than going out and doing something else for the next couple of hours just to earn a little bit more money, that will impact the athlete's performance in the long run.
She called for better communication and planning by relevant authorities and hopes for proper private funding structure to sustain a career in the industry.
NSA should have at least sat down with the athletes and telling them, okay, look, this is what's going to happen, and we are all affected one way or another. So I think timing is one thing as well. You need to give the athletes time to decide what they want to do, because some athletes will have to decide whether they want to move into retirement, they want to go back to education, or they want to look for a job. I mean, if you spring this on them 2 weeks before the end of the year, it's going to be tough. So I think one of the things that we can possibly look at is the funding from private sponsors. So I'm hoping that some private companies will come into the picture, hoping to pick up a few athletes and give them a career, a chance, because the athletes have worked so hard day in and day out, and just to be dropped, without notice and without a safety net.
Meanwhile, Malaysia is having government-to-government talks with India, Bangladesh and Thailand on bringing more foreign workers into the local plantation industry besides Indonesia. Its Minister, Datuk Zuraida Kamarudin, said Indonesia has already approved the entry of 32,000 Indonesians by mid-February after Malaysia settled some technical issues with its government. She explained that there are also other factors being discussed with Indonesia, namely living quarters and the workers' social welfare. When asked if Indonesia requested higher minimum wage, Zuraida said the ministry will engage with plantation companies to negotiate for an amicable solution. The minister also wants to ensure that the plantation industry continues to have a supply of labor to avoid loss of fresh fruit bunches and have consistent palm oil production. However, she stressed that this is only a short-term strategy, as in the next 5 years, the country would be reducing its dependency on foreign labor and replace it with robust automation and mechanization. She added that the government remains committed in implementing strategies and initiatives towards strengthening the palm oil industry. The allocations made under Malaysia's Budget 2022 aims for post-COVID-19 economic recovery and to boost the growth of the agri-commodity industry. Time for a short break. We'll be right back.
Menyelamat di sini. Sebenarnya di sebelah kiri saya juga merupakan saya hari ini sebenarnya di sebelah kiri saya diharapkan bantuan dari pihak kerajaan dapat disalurkan sebenarnya di sebelah kiri saya diharapkan
bencana yang tidak menyertai agama atau latar belakang.
Para lawan yang sama datang membantu dan menyenangkan lagi beban untuk dulu dari sekitar kawasan ini. People dengan kita respon kepada panggilan ini hasillah
Welcome back. The effort to end the pandemic is not a zero-sum race between nations, but a challenge that must be overcome together. This was the message by the National Recovery Council chairperson, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, who emphasized that the world will not recover fully from the pandemic if any country is left behind.
We must press and facilitate manufacturers to not only fulfill their commitment, but also ensure process to get the cheaper and cost more accessible to many people in many less poor developed countries. But there are also things we need to pursue at our end. We need to learn from each other and help each other in regard to vaccine rollout. Supply is sometimes only half the challenge. There's also the technical and logistical barriers to overcome. Best practices must be shared. Countries which are struggling in pandemic management must also be assisted. Ending the pandemic is not a zero-sum race to conditions, but a challenge that must be overcome together. The world will not really recover from the pandemic when any one country is left behind. We must also guard that the uneven recoveries both within and between countries. Failing to do this will lead to greater income disparities. It will deepen fault lines that may bring social tensions and even extremism.
He said this during the National Recovery Networking Luncheon at the Expo 2020 Dubai earlier today.
Novak Djokovic was included in the Australian Open draw today, but his fate still hangs in the balance.
The Australian government has yet to decide whether to cancel his visa for a second time. The world number one was released from immigration detention 3 days ago when a court ruled he could stay.
Immigration Minister Alex Hawke faces a tight time frame to decide whether to cancel the unvaccinated player's visa, as the Australian Open is due to start on Monday. He has the right to exercise his personal power to cancel a visa if he deems it would be in the public interest to do so. The defending world champion drew fellow Serb Miomir Kecmanovic for his opening round match, expected to be played on Monday or Tuesday. Djokovic's visa controversy has gone beyond tennis. It has intensified a global debate over the rights of the unvaccinated and become a tricky political issue for Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison as he campaigns for re-election.
Meanwhile, the surge in COVID cases in Australia is putting severe strain on supply chains, forcing authorities to ease quarantine rules for more workers. The country reported a new record high of 147,000 new cases on Thursday.
Almost 92,000 of the new cases were in the most populous state of New South Wales. Hospital admissions and people admitted in the ICU are at their highest in the pandemic, but authorities said the health systems can cope with the rising cases. Victoria State is, however, exempting more workers from quarantine requirements for being close contacts due to impact on the supply chain. Staff in the emergency service, education, and transport can go back to work if they are asymptomatic. Earlier in the week, the federal government announced that close contacts will be allowed to work if their jobs is deemed critical and essential. Many states are facing food shortages as more people are impacted by Omicron.
In other news, South Korea will begin treating COVID patients with Pfizer's antiviral pills on Friday. At least 21,000 of the pills, called Paxlovid, arrived at the Incheon International Airport today. Health officials described the pills as a potentially important tool to suppress hospitalizations and deaths. This is as South Korea braces for another possible surge in infections driven by Omicron. Because supplies will be tight, the pills will be initially available only to patients 65 and over and have mild or moderate symptoms. Officials say another 10,000 pills will come by the end of January. The U.S. slapped sanctions over North Korea's weapon program following a series of missile launches, including 2 since last week. The first of such sanctions imposed is aimed at preventing North Korea from advancing the programs.
The sanctions by the Biden administration targeted 6 North Korean nationals, 1 Russian, and a Russian firm. Washington said they were responsible for procuring goods for the programs from Russia and China and contributed to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. It added that the actions follow 6 ballistic missile launches since September 2021 by North Korea, which violated multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions.
Japan and Thailand agreed to launch a new energy policy dialogue and collaborate on projects to promote decarbonization. The 2 countries aim for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050.
Japanese Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry Koichi Hagiuda and Thai counterpart Supathanapong Pamichao signed a memorandum for the initiatives during talks in Bangkok. This includes long-term programs and joint projects involving green technology and human resources to promote investment in the energy sector. Earlier this year, Japan announced its Asia Energy Transition Initiative, under which it promised to give $10 billion in financial support to Thailand and other ASEAN member states for renewable energy, energy efficiency, and other projects.
News of flooding across Peninsular Malaysia was dominated by the devastation in Selangor, eclipsing many other areas and states. Tonight on Consider This, we ask our guests about recovery efforts there. That is all we have for you on AWANI tonight. Get the latest news updates on the Astro AWANI app or astroawani.com. I'm Saraya Mia. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again.